June 6, 1944. The Normandy coast, France. 1,500 LCVP landing craft surged toward 5 defended beaches, carrying the largest amphibious invasion force in military history. 1,500 moored Allied troops committed to a single morning's assault on Nazi-occupied Europe. Each boat holds 36 soldiers packed into a steel box, measuring 36 feet long and 10 feet wide, a diesel engine that sounds like a farm tractor, and a front ramp that drops onto hostile beaches in a design every U.S. Navy engineer examined in 1941 declared fundamentally unsound. The boats shouldn't work. Naval architecture principles say the flat bottom makes them dangerously unstable in ocean swells. The front-loading ramp violates basic maritime engineering. When you drop the front of a boat, seawater floods in and swamps the vessel. And the man who designed them had never built a military ship in his life. But in the next 90 seconds, those 1,500 fundamentally unsound boats will do what 20 years of Navy research couldn't achieve. They'll land troops directly onto hostile beaches, discharge their entire load in under 20 seconds, and reverse off before enemy fire destroys them. Without these boats, D-Day doesn't happen. The Pacific Island hopping campaign becomes impossible. The entire Allied strategy collapses because you can't invade Fortress Europe or Japanese-held islands using landing craft that get men killed before they reach shore. The question becomes, how did a boat builder from New Orleans solve a problem that defeated the U.S. Navy's best engineers? Gallipoli, Turkey, April 25, 1915. British and Anzac forces attempt an amphibious assault against Turkish positions. The landing craft force soldiers to climb over the sides into chest-deep water while carrying 60 pounds of equipment. Turkish machine guns open fire from elevated positions. Men drown weighted down by their packs. Men get shot before reaching shore. The campaign becomes a 9-month disaster, resulting in 250,000 Allied casualties. Military planners learn one brutal fact. You cannot successfully assault a defended beach by forcing men to climb over the sides of boats into deep water while under fire. The physics don't work. The casualty rates are unsustainable. 26 years pass. The U.S. Navy continues designing landing craft using the same basic approach, boats that discharge troops over the sides. Some proposals include rope ladders. Some use cargo nets. None solve the fundamental problem. A soldier climbing over the side of a boat in chest-deep water takes 45 seconds to reach shore. 45 seconds of being a perfect target, unable to run, unable to take cover. The obvious solution: put a ramp on the front of the boat. The problem: every engineer who examines this concept concludes it won't work. The technical objections are substantial. Problem 1. Water intrusion. Drop a ramp on the front, and ocean waves flood the interior faster than pumps can remove it. The boat swamps and sinks. Problem 2. Structural integrity. Cut a large opening in the bow, and you weaken the entire hull. In rough seas, catastrophic failure. Problem 3. The ramp mechanism. Any system of hinges and cables will jam with sand, seaweed, and salt water. Combat guarantees mechanical failure. Problem 4. Stability. A flat-bottomed boat with a front ramp will be dangerously unstable in ocean swells. The boat won't cut through waves, it will pound against them. The Bureau of Ships examines multiple front-loading designs throughout the 1930s. Every evaluation reaches the same conclusion: theoretically appealing, but practically unworkable. Then, in early 1941, a Marine officer named Victor Brute Krulak hears about a boat builder in Louisiana who designs shallow draft vessels that can run onto sandbars and unload cargo from the front. Andrew Higgins operates a small boat-building company in New Orleans, specializing in craft for oil exploration in Louisiana coastal marshes. His boats navigate in water measured in inches, with tunnel sterns protecting the propellers from fouling. The boats can run in 12 inches of water, drive straight onto mudflats, and reverse off without getting stuck. Krulak sees the connection. If a boat can drive onto a sandbar and unload cargo from the front, it can drive onto a beach and discharge troops from the front. He takes a train to New Orleans without authorization, using his own money. Going through official channels means the idea dies in committee. Higgins meets him at the boatyard. 52 years old, no formal engineering education, built his first boat at age 12. Krulak explains what he needs. A boat that can approach a hostile beach, drive onto sand, drop a front ramp, let soldiers charge forward. Higgins points at one of his swamp boats. This runs in water shallow enough I can spit farther. Drive it onto mud. Back off, no problem. Can you put a ramp on the front? I can put a ramp on anything, Higgins says. 3 weeks later, the prototype arrives at the Marine Corps Equipment Board in Quantico, Virginia. It looks like someone welded a barn door to a rectangular steel box. The ramp is crude, a flat steel plate on hinges with a cable pulley system. The welds are rough. The Navy produces a 12-page report explaining why it won't work. Water will flood over the ramp. The mechanism will jam. The flat bottom makes it dangerous, and Higgins has no experience building military vessels. Conclusion: this design represents a fundamental misunderstanding of naval architecture principles. The Marine Corps reads the report, then tests the boat anyway. May 26, 1941, New River, North Carolina. Marines run the prototype through simulated combat conditions. Rough seas, 4-foot waves, live ammunition, obstacles in the water. The coxswain drives straight toward shore at full throttle. The flat bottom pounds against waves. The ride is violent. At 10 yards from shore, he cuts the throttle. The boat slides up onto the beach. The ramp drops. 36 Marines charge forward onto dry sand. Total time, 18 seconds. They run the test again. 17 seconds. Third test. 19 seconds. By the end of 3 days, 23 tests. The ramp jams twice, both times fixed in under 5 seconds. The boat never swamps. The flat bottom proves stable enough for short runs from ship to shore. The Marines' conclusion: revolution in amphibious assault capability. Recommend immediate procurement. The Bureau of Ships doubles down. The boat worked in tests. Combat will reveal the flaws. The Navy should not commit to an untested design from an inexperienced contractor. The debate continues through summer 1941. Then December 7th happens. Pearl Harbor transforms everything. The United States enters war against an island empire scattered across 6,000 miles of Pacific Ocean. Every strategic objective requires amphibious assault. Using conventional landing craft will produce casualty rates that might make the island-hopping campaign impossible. The debate ends. December 15, 1941. The Navy orders 1,000 LCVPs, landing craft, vehicle, personnel, option for 20,000 more. Andrew Higgins gets the contract with one condition: deliver boats faster than any shipyard in history. The military needs 20,000 boats in 2 years. Traditional boat building takes weeks or months per craft. Higgins has to build boats in days. If you want to see how Higgins transformed a small boat shop into the factory that built 40% of all Navy vessels in World War II and changed how America manufactures military equipment, please hit that like button. It helps us share these stories. Please subscribe if you haven't already. Back to Higgins. January 1942. Higgins Industries, New Orleans. Traditional boat building involves skilled craftsmen hand-fitting components. Production rate may be 1 boat per week per builder. At that rate, 20,000 boats would require 385 years. Higgins approaches it like Henry Ford building cars. Standardize everything. Eliminate custom fitting. Use unskilled labor. Break construction into repetitive modular tasks. The LCVP design gets ruthlessly simplified. Hull divided into prefabricated sections. Standard hinges and cables for the ramp. No custom components. Commercial gray marine diesel engine. Basic mild steel armor. Every component designed so multiple contractors can manufacture it in parallel. Distributed production means bombing one facility doesn't stop the program. Higgins Industries expands from 75 employees in one building to 8 city blocks, employing 20,000 workers, running 3 shifts. The workforce includes women and African Americans in unprecedented numbers. Higgins doesn't care about social progress. He cares about building boats fast. By summer 1943, 1 LCVP every 23 minutes. 60 boats per day, 420 per week. Raw steel to finished vessel in less than 3 weeks. Quality control. If it floats and the ramp works, it ships. Rough welds are fine if structurally sound. Perfect is the enemy of done. By 1944, Higgins delivers over 20,000 landing craft. More than 40% of all Navy vessels built during the war. Every single one has that front ramp. The Bureau of Ships said would fail. The first combat test comes 17 months after Pearl Harbor. November 21, 1943. Tarawa Atoll, Gilbert Islands. The first American amphibious assault against heavily fortified Japanese positions. Betio Island, 3,000 Japanese defenders. Concrete bunkers, artillery, machine guns. Intelligence says bombardment will suppress defenses. Intelligence is catastrophically wrong. The bombardment misses most targets. A coral reef forces some landing craft to stop 700 yards offshore in water too deep for men to wade effectively. Marines in older craft climb over the sides and attempt to wade to shore in chest-deep water. Japanese machine guns open fire. Men drown. Men get shot. The water turns red. But Marines and LCVPs cross the reef. The flat bottom only draws 3 feet when loaded. They drive onto the beach. Ramps drop. Marines charge forward onto sand, still under devastating fire, but moving, not struggling through water. Over 1,000 Marines die in 76 hours. But without LCVPs crossing the reef, the assault would have failed completely. Casualty rates would have prevented establishing a beachhead. The boat didn't make Tarawa easy. It made Tarawa possible. 7 months later comes the ultimate test. June 6, 1944. D-Day, Normandy, France. 150,000 Allied troops assault 5 beaches in a single morning. Over 1,500 LCVPs deliver initial assault waves. Omaha Beach becomes the nightmare scenario. German defenses stronger than predicted. The 352nd Infantry Division, positioned where it's not supposed to be. Bombing and naval gunfire miss most targets. First waves hit under devastating fire. MG-42 machine guns at 1,200 rounds per minute. 88mm artillery. Mortars. Men die within seconds of ramps dropping. Some boats take direct hits and sink. The beach becomes a killing zone. But men are getting off the boats. They're on the beach, not drowning. They're moving forward, even if it means crawling. And the boats keep coming, wave after wave. A soldier climbing over the side of conventional landing craft in chest-deep water takes 45 seconds to reach shore under fire. Most don't make it. A soldier charging down an LCVP ramp takes 8 seconds to reach the waterline and start running. 8 seconds versus 45. That 37-second difference is the difference between horrific casualties and unsustainable casualties. By day's end, 150,000 men ashore. Over 4,000 Americans killed, 8,000 wounded. But the beachheads hold. Reinforcements keep landing. Within a week, Allied forces push inland. Every after-action report mentions the same critical factor. The Higgins boat made it possible. After the war, General Dwight D. Eisenhower makes a statement that defines Higgins' contribution. Andrew Higgins is the man who won the war for us. If Higgins had not designed and built those LCVPs, we never could have landed over an open beach. The whole strategy of the war would have been different. The man who won the war, not a general, not an admiral. A boat builder from Louisiana who designed shallow draft boats for oil companies and accidentally solved amphibious warfare because he didn't know enough about naval architecture to understand why his ideas were supposed to be impossible. The technical genius of the LCVP isn't revolutionary technology, it's rethinking the problem from first principles. The Navy wanted a boat that could navigate ocean swells and discharge troops. The requirements conflicted. Higgins asked, "What's the minimum seakeeping needed for short runs, and what matters most at the beach?" Answer: the boat doesn't need to handle like a destroyer. It needs to survive the trip. The flat bottom that makes it pound in deep water becomes an advantage in shallows. It slides onto beaches without propeller damage or getting stuck. The front-loading ramp works because Higgins understood something Navy engineers missed. You don't need to prevent water from coming in. You just need to prevent enough water to sink the boat before troops disembark. The LCVP accepts waves washing over the ramp. Bilge pumps handle it. By the time water accumulation becomes a problem, soldiers are ashore and the boat is backing away. The tunnel stern protecting the propeller exists because Louisiana swamps are full of stumps that would destroy conventional propellers. That same protection works against coral reefs and beach obstacles. Higgins didn't design it for combat. He designed it for commercial work. But the commercial solution transferred perfectly to the military problem. Every feature that makes the LCVP effective exists because Higgins was solving different problems. Between 1942 and 1945, Higgins Industries produces 20,339 LCVPs, more landing craft than the rest of the world combined. D-Day uses over 1,500 just for initial assault waves. The Pacific Campaign depends entirely on landing troops quickly on hostile beaches. Conservative estimates: the LCVP reduced amphibious assault casualties by 50% compared to conventional landing craft. 50,000 Allied soldiers came home because a boat builder refused to accept that amphibious warfare had to be slow and suicidal. The basic design, flat-bottomed landing craft with front ramp, becomes the template for every amphibious assault vessel since 1945. Modern landing craft are larger, faster, better armored, but they all use Higgins' fundamental concept. The Marines still operate variants today, 80 years after the first prototype. Andrew Jackson Higgins died August 1, 1952, age 63. Largely forgotten despite Eisenhower's praise. His company bankrupt. His industrial empire sold off. The man who won the war died broke. But the boats survived. The National WWII Museum in New Orleans displays a fully restored LCVP. Visitors can walk up the ramp, see the crude welds and simple mechanism. The boat looks primitive. Nothing fancy, just steel, hinges, and determination. But it worked. The story of the Higgins boat is about the difference between theoretical perfection and practical effectiveness. Naval architects wanted a perfect landing craft that met all specifications. Higgins built a boat that got soldiers onto beaches alive. The first approach produces beautiful failures. The second approach wins wars. The Bureau of Ships was right about the technical problems. The flat bottom does make it unstable. Water does flood over the ramp. The design violates naval architecture principles. But when 1,500 of those wrong boats landed 150,000 men on Normandy beaches, none of the technical objections mattered. What mattered was men got off the boats in 18 seconds instead of dying in the water. What mattered was enough survived to establish beachheads, push inland, and win. That's why Eisenhower called Andrew Higgins the man who won the war. Not because the LCVP was perfect, because it worked when everything else failed. If this story moved you, hit that like button. Every like tells YouTube to show this story to more people. Hit subscribe and turn on notifications. We're rescuing forgotten stories from dusty archives every single day. Stories about engineers and innovators who changed history. Drop a comment and tell us where you're watching from. United States, United Kingdom, Canada, Australia. You're not just a viewer, you're part of keeping these memories alive. Thank you for watching, and thank you for making sure Andrew Higgins and the innovation that changed warfare forever don't disappear into silence. These stories deserve to be remembered. And you're helping make that happen.